We were talking a couple of minutes ago before he came out about hockey players in Trenton. And he said, yeah, you mentioned Mel Bridgman. I got a good Mel Bridgman story. What's your Mel Bridgman story?
Well, it was good for him. I didn't know Mel was from here. I knew he was from out west. I knew he was tough as nails, Philadelphia Flyer. Got traded to Calgary.
Yep.
The old Calgary arena, which was the corral prior to the Saddle Dome, was really small. And in those days, the early 80s, when a fight broke out, everybody broke out, and everybody would pair off with somebody. So Mel grabbed Messier. So I'm like, I got him, Mark. I kind of step in there, and Mel hit me with so many lefts, I was begging for a right. As you can tell by my nose, not much of a fighter, but I competed.
But we talk so much about, like we were just talking about, Anaheim and Arizona all of a sudden is spicy. Last couple of years, the Battle of Alberta has heated up, but we always say it's not like it used to be. Like, Paul, we watched those games. Those took 4 hours. Like, those were long, drawn-out games. To your point, when one fight breaks out, 5 fights break out. What was that like for you?
It was a lot of fun. I mean, Calgary, like we'd skate around a warm up, and you'd be right out of slap shot. Mass would be going like, holy shit, look at this guy. He's right out of the Pinot League, like hair thing. And the first period would be absolute fight night, but we had not only a great hockey club, but a tough team. So the first period would be absolute fights, as Jeff alluded to, but then the score would always be 7-3, 8-3, 9-1. Until Bob Johnson and Cliff Fletcher got involved with the Flames, and then they started getting a hockey team. There were still fights, but a good hockey team. But it was a lot of fun. I don't think, they talk a lot about it now, and I know for sure that if a fight breaks out in the rink in Trenton, nobody's leaving. In those days, nobody left. They loved it.
Was there anybody that you were ever scared of? You said, like, that's a guy who... I look at him and I say, it's not all there. And I'm not too crazy about being out there with him.
Well, probably, yeah, that's a great question. Now my mind's starting to go. But probably the toughest, craziest guy that ever played. And Dave Semenko, the late, great Dave Semenko, on the Oilers would tell you the same thing. The one guy he feared the most was Ben Wilson.
Yeah.
Ben played in Philly. Ben played in Chicago. Ben had a screw loose. So I'm in the Chicago Stadium. Stevie Ludzik, a dear friend of mine, loves to tell this story, but I'm at the blue line. Chicago bench is here. Ben's looking at me going, Coffey, I get on this fucking ice, you're fucking dead. I look over very calmly. Ben, how come every time I'm on the ice, you're on the bench? 10 seconds later, he comes on, I go off. That's the true story.
You mentioned
Smart.
You mentioned Dave Semenko, the late wonderful Dave Semenko, and one of the great stories that I've always heard about Dave is lining up with someone. If he wanted to fight with him, he wouldn't do that. Come on, we're going, dropping the puck. Called it witty goon talk. And my favorite Dave Semenko line is he would saddle up next to someone, and he'd say, and this almost gives me chills thinking about it now, thinking Dave Semenko lining up next to you and saying this. Like, just imagine Dave Semenko pulls up to you at the draw, looks over at you and says this: why don't you and I go on a little canoe ride? And that was his way of inviting someone to fight. Why don't you and I go on a little canoe ride? Do you have a word or two about Dave Semenko?
Yeah, Semenko, I was lucky to be a part of a pretty good hockey club, led by, in my estimation, the greatest hockey player that ever played, and that's Wayne. And he was our leader, our hardest worker, and it's the same thing with the current Oiler team right now with Connor. If your best player is your hardest worker, it's shame on you if you don't get in line. And I tell people all the time, that team had 7 Hall of Famers, but that's not what our team was all about. There was the Dave Semenkos, the Dave Hunters, the McClellans, Lee Fogelins, Randy Greggs, Donnie Jacksons, et cetera, that made that team perfect. And, Dave passed away a few years ago, and I spoke, did the eulogy, and I remember my first training camp in Jasper, Alberta. Come out, the old school days, the coach blows the whistle and you're flying around. I'm just humming, right? I'm ready to go. And These guys are used to having training camp 4 or 5 weeks before they get in shape. All of a sudden, I get a hand on my shoulder. Slow down, kid. We got 4 weeks out here, but that's some ink. And then we're kind of sitting around. I still remember at the Athabascan Hotel in Jasper, Alberta. I'm kind of a shy kid. I'm by myself, and all the veterans are over here, and they're drinking. I still remember it, Olympia beer. And Cement comes over, and I don't know, he just took a liking to me, luckily for me, and he said, you want to make some friends? I said, oh, yeah. He says, buy a round of beer. So I said, no problem. So I bought 30 beers, and I think it cost $50 or $53, and I'm kind of over there sitting by myself again. And he goes, you all right? And I said, yeah, but I got no money. And he goes, after I paid for the beers, he goes, oh, yeah, but look at all the friends you made. No, he was great. Archie Henderson, who was a tough guy who I heard stories about forever. He was a scout with Edmonton, and he came to Smenk's funeral, which I thought was absolutely phenomenal. Went and found him, thanked him for coming. Smenk would love it that you're here. And he told me a story that, because they used to fight all the time in the Western League, and Smenk was on the ice in Hartford playing for the Oilers, and Tex Evans, the old coach of Hartford, sends Archie out, and Archie skates around Smenk 2 or 3 times wanting to go, and Smenk looks at him and goes, how you doing, Archie? Archie goes, yeah, long time no see. Smenk goes, well, I guess so. You've been in the minors for 6 years. He was very witty and a huge part of our team.
So you mentioned Gretzky. You played with some unbelievable players: Gretzky, Lemieux, Yzerman, Lindros. Just like maybe a story or two about Gretzky, what it was like to play with him, and you know what you saw from him when he was at his incredible best.
Well, people always ask me how did Wayne ever score 215 points, and my answer is always easy. He was trying to score 300. He just wanted to score every time he was on the ice, set people up. He knew that was his job. Not selfish, and he was just an incredible and a fiery heart. Like, he wanted to win every single night.